Hi, this is Chris Young. Welcome to episode 84 of Contemplating Life. This is the last in a multi-part series inspired by the hit movie musical Wicked. In this series, we'll explore my relationship with musical theater, fairy tales, and fantasy in general. In our last episode, we talked about my fascination with the made-for-TV musical Cinderella. Around that time, I also immensely enjoyed one other musical TV special. Sometime in the early 1960s, probably more than once, I also enjoyed the production of the 1954 musical Peter Pan, based on J. M. Barrie's 1904 play and the 1911 novelization Peter and Wendy. NBC aired versions of the musical in 1955 and 1956, but I probably would have been too young to recall those. But there was another production in 1960 which was videotaped in color. It was rebroadcast in 1963, 66, and 73. My guess is that the 63 broadcast was the first I ever saw, but I might have seen the 1960. I also distinctly remember watching it in color, but I don't think we had color TV by 66, so that might have been the 73 broadcast. NBC also aired a restored version of the videotape in 89 and 91, and from there it was moved to the Disney Channel, where it was shown several times. A version of the musical starring former Olympic gymnast Kathy Rigby eventually made it to television, and I caught a performance of it. It brought back many nostalgic memories of the original. NBC also produced a new production in 2014, starring Allison Williams as Peter and Christopher Walken as Captain Hook. The original Broadway and TV productions featured Mary Martin as Peter Pan. I never understood why a woman has so often played the role of Peter. If the musical were produced today, I am sure that the anti-woke forces would condemn it for having a woman play a male character. Peter is the leader of a group known as the Lost Boys, yet he's not portrayed by a boy in any of these musical productions. And there's nothing significant about the flying sequence stunts that would make a woman more appropriate for the role. I also thought the plot was a bit kinky, and that the Lost Boys practically kidnapped Wendy to become their mother. Anyway, I could go on and on about various versions of the story, including the 1991 Steven Spielberg film Hook, which features Robin Williams as an adult Peter Pan and Dustin Hoffman as Captain Hook. However, as much as I enjoyed the various adaptations of this 1957 musical on TV, I didn't connect with the story as much as I did with Cinderella. One final point. While researching this, I discovered a 1950 musical based on Peter Pan, with music and lyrics by Leonard Bernstein. The original production featured only a half dozen songs, but researchers uncovered that Bernstein wrote much more music than was originally used. There have been several subsequent productions that include the restored Bernstein score. I'll be looking for a way to see that version, or at least hear the soundtrack, which I believe is available. Finally, let's talk about the musical that is the focus of this episode, the 1939 film The Wizard of Oz. It's based on the children's novel The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, originally published in 1900 by L. Frank Baum. The film was nominated for a Best Picture Oscar, but lost to Gone with the Wind. It was also nominated for art direction and special effects. It won the Academy Award for the musical score and for the best song, Over the Rainbow. I think much of my nostalgic appreciation of the film is tied to that song. The original Judy Garland version is magnificent, and I don't think I've ever heard a bad cover version.
Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby.
My favorite cover, however, is undoubtedly a soulful reinterpretation by late folk singer Eva Cassidy.
Somewhere over the rainbow way, up high, in a land that I heard of once in a lullaby.
Please check out the YouTube video of the Eva Cassidy version, linked in the description. Unfortunately, she died of melanoma in 1996. Another amazing popular version was created by Native Hawaiian singer Israel Kamakaworli, or however you pronounce it.
Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, and the dreams that you dream of once in a lullaby.
He significantly adapted the lyrics and melody and combined them with the Louis Armstrong hit, What a Wonderful World. Sadly, he died of complications from obesity in June 1997, at age 38, before seeing his recording become a big hit. I'm also extremely fond of a version that Katharine McPhee performed in the final round of American Idol Season 5.
Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby.
I think that performance made me a permanent fan of the show. On November 3rd, 1956, the 1939 film The Wizard of Oz was the first feature-length film to air uncut on primetime coast-to-coast television. This was partially in response to the popularity of Peter Pan, which had first aired on NBC in 1955. CBS paid $225,000 per showing for the rights to the movie. That would be $2.6 million in today's money. Now, the film runs for 101 minutes, so even with adding commercial breaks, CBS needed to fill more time for a 2-hour time slot. The network hired a host to introduce the program and to briefly comment before and after each commercial break. Burt Lahr, who played the Cowardly Lion in the film, hosted the initial broadcast. It was shown again in 1959, and then annually thereafter until 1991, when it was shown twice. It wasn't shown in 92, but twice in 93. The program moved back and forth between CBS and NBC several times throughout these years. See the linked Wikipedia article for details of the various showings of the film on TV, including its move to cable in 1999. I recall at a young age being at my Grandma Osterman's house, and my family was having an excited conversation about an upcoming showing of the film on TV. My grandmother said Dick Van Dyke is going to be the MC. What's an MC? I inquired. My family informed me that it was an abbreviation for Master of Ceremonies. I still had no idea what they were talking about. I must have had some familiarity with the film because I didn't remember a character called MC. Still, I think that the airing with Dick Van Dyke as the host or MC or whatever you want to call it was probably the first time I saw the film. According to Wikipedia, he was the host in 1961 and 1962, which would have made me 6 or 7 years old, respectively. And not only was I enchanted by the song Over the Rainbow, I also had a great fondness for the other musical numbers, including the 3 versions of If I Only Had a brain, a heart, or the nerve. I can't guarantee that I saw the film every year after that initial viewing, but I'm confident I saw it many, many times. I recently discussed the movie with my sister Carol, who's 8 years younger than me, and she too has many fond memories of watching it year after year on TV. It was an annual event we look forward to every year. At a young age, it didn't bother me that the wizard was a fake. I think Frank Morgan's portrayal of him as a sort of absent-minded professor was so endearing that you didn't mind that he was actually a con man. It wasn't until years later when the phrase, "pay no attention to the man behind the curtain," became such a euphemism for someone who's engaged in a cover-up that I began to see the wizard in a negative light. I was always a bit disappointed that Dorothy woke up only to discover that it was all just a dream, and that her world had reverted to the mundane sepia-tone life that she had lived, rather than the technicolor adventure she had experienced. Sure, it was nice that she now had a deep appreciation for what it meant to be home, but it meant that all her fantastic experiences were simply figments of her imagination. She was just dreaming about a place over the rainbow and never got to experience the adventures of the larger world beyond her simple Kansas farm life. It wasn't until years later that I learned that L. Frank Baum wrote several other books about Oz, including return trips that Dorothy made. And eventually, she and her Uncle Henry and Auntie Em became permanent residents of Oz. That would have reinforced the idea that Oz was a real place. I think I would have liked that. Considering Hollywood's obsession with franchises and sequels, I never understood why the remaining 13 books were never adapted for film. It wasn't until I researched this episode that I discovered the 1985 film Return to Oz, based on 2 of the later L. Frank Baum novels. It must not have been very successful if I never heard of it. I did see Sam Raimi's 2013 film, Oz the Great and Powerful, that was the original screenplay, and I enjoyed it very much in 3D. But I have to confess, I don't remember much about the plot. I never saw the 2005 made-for-TV film, The Muppets Wizard of Oz, although I thought it was strange that they would make such a movie, because the original 1979 The Muppet Movie was the thinly disguised version of The Wizard of Oz. Songwriters Kenny Asher and Paul Williams discussed the need to write a song that would be a stand-in for Over the Rainbow. They rejected several approaches because none of them had the rainbow connection. That produced a eureka moment, and they wrote a song for Kermit titled The Rainbow Connection. I think I was about halfway through the Muppet movie when I realized that the story was an homage to the original Wizard of Oz. I think the pointy hat on top of Gonzo that made him look like the Tin Man was probably the giveaway. I also figured out the connection between the Rainbow Connection and Over the Rainbow before I heard Paul Williams explain the song's origins on a talk show soon after its release. It just occurred to me there are many similarities between Over the Rainbow and In My Own Little Chair from Cinderella. Both are sung by young women stuck in a mundane existence and dreaming of exciting adventures in a faraway place. What is it about these songs that's so appealing to me? I don't know. As Kermit explained in his version of the song,
someday we'll find it, the rainbow connection, the lovers, the dreamers, and me.
It's tough to put into words what that original 1939 film means to me. I don't have a personal connection to it the way I connected to Cinderella sitting in her own little corner in her own little chair. Still, nevertheless, I was thoroughly enchanted by the film when I first saw it in the early 1960s, and on every subsequent viewing since then. As previously reported, it's in my top 10 lists of favorite musicals of all time. Now, I heard about the Broadway musical Wicked years ago, but I didn't think much about it. I thought it was an attempt to rip off or capitalize on the popularity of the original story. A few years ago, at the insistence of my roommate Barb, I saw the 2014 film Maleficent and the 2019 sequel Maleficent, Mistress of Evil. These stories attempt to explain away the evil of the Wicked Queen from the classic Sleeping Beauty fairy tale. It seemed to me that Wicked was just another attempt to make excuses for an evil character. I was unaware that the musical Wicked was first produced in 2003 and was a loose adaptation of the 1995 Gregory Maguire novel Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West, both of which predate Maleficent. I knew about the popularity of the Broadway musical, even though I hadn't heard any of the songs, even the especially popular Defying Gravity. I never heard it. I also knew the film would be very popular, but I wasn't particularly anxious to rush out to see it in a theater. I was also a little wary when I heard that Wicked Part 1 would be released on Thanksgiving 2014, because I wasn't sure I wanted to waste my time on half a movie. Maybe I'd wait until Part 2 was available. But when it finally became available as a digital download, I decided to take a leap and get a copy. I watched it with my sister Carol in 2 sessions because the film runs a long 2 hours and 40 minutes, longer than the entire Broadway musical. I was totally blown away by the entire experience, as was Carol. So in my next episode, I'll review that film as part of the opening of my annual review of the 10 Oscar-nominated Best Pictures. We interrupt this podcast for a special announcement. For the past 10 days or so, I've been struggling with a really nasty case of influenza A. I spent lots of days in bed and on my ventilator during the day, which I typically only use at night. Today's February 17. That's the first I've been able to stay out of bed for an extended period. Only 7 of the 10 Best Picture nominated films are available for streaming or digital download. One of the 3 remaining films is completely unavailable online, and 2 others are only available via bootleg copies where someone took a camera into a theater. I try to avoid those unless I absolutely have to. I always purchase the movie afterwards to make up for it. As a result, I'm not going to be able to review all 10 movies by March 2nd when the Oscars are awarded. My current plan is to finish talking about Wicked and perhaps one other nominated musical in the next episode, and then do a brief overview of the remaining nominated films that I've been able to see. I'll not have time to download trailers and clips and still images to include in the YouTube version like I usually do. That's a tremendous amount of work, and I just can't do it. I've had a lot of fun doing this series on musicals and fantasy and fairy tales leading up to this. I think it's some of my best work recently. I guess that'll just have to do for this year's movie reviews. When all that's complete, we'll return to some autobiographical topic. I'm not sure what part of my life I'll cover next. And don't be surprised if we get a political rant thrown in as current events unfold. So as always, if you find this podcast educational, entertaining, enlightening, or even inspiring, consider sponsoring me on Patreon for just $5 per month. You get early access to the podcast and other exclusive content. Every little bit of money helps. As always, my deepest thanks to my financial supporters. There just aren't words to describe what that means to me. And even if you can't provide financial support, please post links, because I just want to grow my audience. All the back episodes are available. Please leave comments wherever you found the podcast. Tell me, what are your favorite musicals? What do you think of the current musicals or the current nominated pictures? I'll see you next time as we continue contemplating life. Until then, fly safe, everyone.